the armchair attorney. It's Matthew Leffler here with us, and we enjoy talking to him. Matthew, how are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you for having me on the program. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, Matthew. Hey, yeah, welcome. I haven't talked to you in quite a while. But I'm reading your stuff on LinkedIn, et cetera. Excellent stuff. Let's talk about what everybody's talking about, right? Let's get your insights on Los Angeles and Long Beach and the negotiations that are happening there. What's on your mind?
Well, true to their word, they haven't stopped yet. So the contract expired on July 1st, but both sides continue to operate. The things that they're talking about are around wages and compensation, but more importantly, I think long term, what does automation look like for the ports of Long Beach and the ports of Los Angeles, where 30% of all freight moves? I mean, to talk about the longshoremen generally, there's 29 ports with 22,000 members moving about 45% of all containerized freight in the United States. This is a big deal, and it's great to see that they're still working together as they explore options to get a new contract in place.
Yeah, now, when we talked to Eric Coolidge earlier at the beginning of the show about this. I asked him the question if the negotiations or the statements and the sticking to, we're going to keep working through this. We're confident we're going to get something done, is partly out of fear of losing business to the East Coast with all these, investments on the East Coast infrastructure for the ports, et cetera. And BCO is already moving their freight that way, right? Fear of that not coming back this way. Do you see that, or is it just, hey, we're just all great and we love each other and we're singing Kumbaya and dancing around a campfire?
The longshoremen are under enormous pressure. Not only are they competing with their own businesses in terms of the West Coast, but to the East Coast ports as well. I think you're right on the money. The other thing to keep in mind is the longshoremen did strike many years ago. They have long memories back in the 1960s after the containerization and mechanization of the ports began. They were on strike for 130 days and they lost. They have no desire to go back to that place. And in the court of public opinion, there's not a single article that you're going to read that doesn't talk about how these longshoremen are making upwards of $100,000 a year. Now, we have to understand that the cost of living in California is 173% above that of the rest of the United States. But it's hard to be sympathetic to a group that has that kind of wages. So to your point, they're competing with the East Coast ports. When Panama expanded the canal, you can go to Savannah, you can go to Houston, you go to Virginia. There's plenty of places that want to take in your containers.
Yeah, and the automation part of it, how big is that really in this argument? Because we also talked about this, so I put forth this kind of idea, and Sydney and I were talking about this when we were off air, because it's a really interesting point.
It was a good question.
You have a hard time getting the labor, right? Specifically in a railroad, but you also at the ports as well, with all the volume that's coming on, right? And the increase in volume that's going to be there over the years moving forward. Automation really helps you compete, and we're so far behind the rest of the world, and that's become quite evident. How big of a deal is that in these negotiations, and is it maybe less of a deal given those scenarios I just laid out?
Automation is the juggernaut. You cannot stop it. You can only slow it down. And when we're talking about the trends and forces that affect our supply chain, automation is going to come. The thing to keep in mind is that wages and availability of workers, that's short term. Automation is long term. If you have the automation of these things, that is about reducing what you would have in your members over the course of many, many years. So to think about what the longshoremen are contemplating, your power is your members, and anything that will diminish your members will ultimately be an enemy to you. So automation is this massive fear, I think, for them right now. The contract that they're working through for the last couple of iterations of different agreements they've carved out small bits and pieces of automation, but automated trucks, automated jacklifts, and everything in the cranes, this will not stop. This is the thing I think they are most concerned about, is how do you prepare yourself for the future, knowing that ultimately it will displace your membership. That is what containerization did, and that is what automation will likely do. We've seen it in American manufacturing. We talk about free trade being the thing that has destroyed the manufacturing in the United States. I don't think that's the case. I think automation and high-speed manufacturing has really done a number on the American worker. So this, I believe, besides the wages and pension and benefits, automation, I believe, is the key thing that they are fighting and discussing about right now.
I think the one thing that I would like to know is how detrimental it could be to just continue to slow this down instead of jumping on board and trying to get ahead of automation.
That's a great question. I mean, there's a study by McKinsey in 2018 that showed that automating a place it actually reduced capacity and speed by 15%. So the big challenge with automation is you're talking about a massive capital expenditure, and that capital expenditure may or may not result in you saving money or making more money. So I do think that there's a systematic approach of crawl, walk, run. We do want to get automation. That's important. We have to. The trends and forces can't be stopped, but we have to be conscious of how we do it. Parts of these ports on the West Coast are having some level of automation. So it's not like they're purely human beings doing everything. We are seeing automation. But I think that as this goes on, the automation perspective isn't going to be this panacea that will solve every supply chain problem we have. It is one factor in a more comprehensive approach. But I don't think it is the one thing you do that saves everyone time and money.
So, Matt, I'm interested in how you see the tense, the level of negotiation here. The tense, how tense are these negotiations? Are we to believe really that the both sides got together and say, hey, you know what, we ought to just call up Biden and say, hey, we love each other. We're going to just keep everything going. It's just beautiful. Everything's great. We're hammering this out. No rush. We all agree. I mean, that's what they would have us believe is going on there. What is it like there, really?
That's a great question. I don't have any visibility into the internal negotiations that are going on. But if I look as an outside observer with all the facts we've outlined, that the East Coast ports are able to automate faster, they're able to receive bigger boats. We understand that the Pacific Maritime Commission, the ones that run this stuff, sorry, I'm bad with the names. What we've learned about this, there's so many letters. What we've learned about this is that the Pacific Maritime Association has raked in over $150 billion of profit. They are in a very strong position. Now, they're not historically as profitable as they are right now, but the longshoremen are also seeing that, hey, we want a bigger piece of this, but also we have to protect ourselves long term. I think this is an existential battle between both sides. And unfortunately, as a technologist, automation is coming. You aren't going to stop it. These jobs that are being done by human beings may not be done by human beings in 10 or 15 years from now. So I do think it's much more tense than it's let on. However, it is incredibly important for the American consumer to know the goods will not stop flowing. And they will continue to work together because the longshoremen know if they strike, they are going to lose this fight because the East Coast ports will say, come on down, we're ready for business, we're ready to take on more freight. And I don't think they're prepared for that at this time.
Yeah, it's also a very undesirable black eye for the current administration to have this occur as well. But as this goes forward and forward, how likely is it that we start to see maybe a slowdown or work to the rule type of situation there? How efficient are the ports really going to be as this goes on longer and longer? And really, who gains the upper hand the longer it goes?
That's a great question. I think that we might see a slowdown at some point if they can't come to an agreement. But ultimately, our ports, Long Beach and LA specifically, are not a very efficient ports. I mean, the containers wait a long time. There's long wait lines for truck drivers. I don't know how much slower they can go, but I'm sure there's a path for this. At the end of the day, they will come to a deal.
You can always figure it out.
That's right.
Matthew, before we let you go, any last insights for the folks that are watching when it comes to these negotiations?
I want people to learn about the history of our supply chain. Back in 1980, 60% of truck drivers were unionized. The unions built this supply chain, and over the course of deregulation and the rise of independent contractors, these things are all linked together. To think that something like AB5, which we haven't talked about here, is not somehow linked to this negotiation with the longshoremen is wrong. Our supply chain has a long and fruitful history, and it's important to understand where we came from to understand where we're going. My dad was a roadway guy back in 76. Before deregulation, it's a different environment then. It's a different environment now. The supply chain will always be resilient because we still need the stuff.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you so much for being on the show, Matt. Very insightful. You have a wonderful rest of your day. Right now, I'm going to toss it right next to me to Sydney Edwards for our headlines.